Explain like I'm 5. Why is it so common for fantasy media uses British accents? I've noticed that fantasy movies, shows, games, etc. tend to have characters that use mostly British accents. Is there some reason for this? Edit. Thank you everyone. These were all interesting to read. Fantasy setting are usually a reimagined form of the Middle Ages castles, knights, sword fights, dragons, etc. In English at least. It would be odd for medieval knights to speak with a Texan accent. It's anachronistic. So, they speak with English accents because those accents are deemed to be older and so more suitable for the time period. Historically, that's still not quite accurate, because Brits from 1,000 years ago don't at all sound like the Brits today. But people don't know the difference. Not sure, but as a proud Brummie, Birmingham, UK, I was thrilled to bits that Witcher 3 had a whole village full of Brummies grin rolling on the floor laughing. Some good answers already, but I would also venture for a lot of Americans it's an uncanny valley effect with that sounds like me but different and antique. Because high fantasy is based on 1. Medieval Europe with an emphasis on Britannic tales. 2. Celtic mythoi. Those 2 points basically region lock things. Most fantasy settings are based on medieval Europe. If you're writing dialogue in English with the vibe of medieval Europe, it makes sense to use English accents. Why is grammar on Reddit getting so bad lately? Star Wars might be out of the genre you're talking about, but most of the main characters have American accents except Obi-Wan. Most of the upper leadership of the Empire have posh British accents. Why we might associate Britain with imperial conquest and control, I have no idea. They have American-style accents in Wheel of Time and it's canonical to the books. That's set in our future. Most are set in our past before there was an America. Besides the fact that many fantasy media is based on medieval England, Europe, there is another, very practical reason. Many fantasy movies and series are produced in Europe with British actors. The whole Harry Potter cast was from Great Britain. In Game of Thrones, Emilia Clarke, Lana Headey, Kit Harington, Sophie Turner, Maisie Williams, Rory McCann, Ian Glenn, Jack Gleeson, Alfie Allen and many more are British. They don't pretend to have a British accent. They speak their accent because they are, in fact, mythical creatures that don't exist outside of fantasy and Reddit. Arthur. Mostly. Basically the countries dumping out English language media have lot of their trope basis for fantasy and Arthurian myth. It just kind of comes packaged with the medieval setting. Arthur is associated with England, of course, which is why there's an overall medieval fantasy British accents trope instead of some other purely historical place that also had knights and castles like, say, France. Some of this will be confirmation bias. I hear various American accents in all kinds movies and TV, and it sticks out jarring to me. An American probably just heard talk and doesn't consider if the person has an accent. It's very jarring hearing American accents in fantasy as a British person. Going in the face of trends hurts more than novelty. Because ye olde English knights and castles and medieval fairs and the like. High fantasy is just that. Plus magic and witchcraft and sorcery and any other synonyms of the supernatural. IR's happening in sci-fi too. Romulus and other aliens in Star Trek seem to be hailing from the Abrirish Isles nowadays, and it's very distracting. Kinda like how in that Chernobyl show, many Eastern Bloc citizens spoke with non-Eastern accents. I find a British accent easier to understand than my fellow Americans. We slur, we elide, we commit malapropisms. Not just fantasy settings, even when stuff is set in ancient civilizations like Rome. They're often speaking with British accents. A lot of fantasy realms are loosely based on Old Europe. With that, to make it so the English-speaking world can understand, dialogue is usually in English. Put the two together and you get a lot of British accents in fantasy. Most of modern fantasy is heavily inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien. And he was largely inspired by Europe at war. First World War. It happens with French too in fantasy media from Quebec region in Canada, where a dialect of French is spoken. Characters have an exaggerated accent from France. It's not complex. Britain offers heavyweight actors with stage experience playing dramatic characters at bargain rates. With face recognition, the accent is a bonus because it sounds foreign, but received pronunciation is very crisp and intelligible. The combination beats all for US audiences. In addition to the fantasy stuff, almost all film TV is mostly British actors because their union isn't as good, which makes them cheaper than American actors. Have you been to England and eaten their food? It's still basically the medieval period there. Interestingly, Middle-earth, Narnia, Westeros, and even Hyboria were originally British colonies. Therefore, they tend to speak mildly antiquated English with a British accent. Cimmeria remained Austrian. Because English-speaking people in medieval times only existed in England, so creators tend to make things sound English a lot more than they usually would. It's very simple. For media made for American audiences, a British accent signals that the person is from away while still keeping it familiar enough to not require subtitles. Side theory: the whole planet can parse many of the British accents and identify the social order to which they belong. This makes a convenient shorthand for characters' status. Hobbits, happy, civilized Celtish folk. Gandalf, patrician, low-lifes. Gimli, Scottish Highland tough guy. Didn't I hear one of the innkeepers using Mick Jagger's glottal stops? I remember hearing once that Nintendo uses British accents for their translations because they got tired of weebs complaining about Americans mispronouncing Japanese words. They found that when all the words are with a different accent, people stopped complaining. We use English accents for most movies that are set in different countries or in the past as well. HBO's Rome comes to mind. The dunny thing is that if they go even further back than the medieval era in England to base their accents on, they would have to use Latin, Greek and Celtic. Because Lord of the Rings popularized it and everybody wanted to copy the success of Lord of the Rings. Before that, actors tended to just use their own accents. Just watch Conan the Barbarian and listen to the mess of American, British, Mid-Atlantic, Austrian, Japanese, etc. accents all mixed together. Though it's not only fantasy. The Napoleon movie is being released with actors that speak with English accents. This is so weird it's hilarious. Because Great Britain had a Middle Ages medieval times that a lot of fantasy media was based on. Back then, Europeans hadn't colonized North America quite yet. Britain seems to produce actors that are better at subtlety. America can and does produce great actors, but these fantasy films seem to not lend themselves to the great American film star, all teeth and front and center of the action with the best lines. They're like ensemble casts with lines that make no sense about hobgoblins and dragons, scale potion masters and whatnot. Brits just are better at that. 'Cause it's Americans making them, and to their little brains British is old, posh and exotic English.